And I am particularly excited today to be able to host Aaron Sams. Aaron is a wonderful guy and has been an educator since 2000. He is the Flipped Learning Network chair. Aaron recently became the director of digital learning and the director of admissions at the Reformed Presbyterian Theological Seminary in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Prior to this, he was a chemistry teacher at Woodland Park High School in Woodland Park, Colorado. He was awarded the 2009 Presidential Award for Excellence in Math and Science Teaching and served as the co-chair of the Colorado State Science Standards Revision Committee. He frequently speaks and conducts workshops on educational uses of screencasts and the flipped classroom concept. He believes strongly in student-centered learning environments where students are encouraged to learn and demonstrate their understanding in ways that are meaningful to them. He holds a BS in biochemistry and a master's in education from Biola University. Additional information on Aaron can be found on aaronsams.com. So without further ado, I will pass the baton. Welcome, Aaron.
Oh, thanks, Alan, for having me. It's exciting to be here. It's always great to do webinars. I love just the ability to be able to reach lots of people and tell my story without us having to pile into the same room at the same time. And as we all know, that's one of the powerful things about e-learning. So these are just exciting events for me. I do want to just extend my thanks to Adobe for hosting this and also for their continued support and sponsorship on the Flipped Learning Network, and then specifically our conference that we have this summer, which coincidentally will be in Pittsburgh this year. So if you're interested in attending a conference with some colleagues, I'll have a little bit of information about that towards the end of my presentation. So today's session is entitled Flipped Classrooms 5 Mistakes to Avoid. I'll actually be basing this on a blog post that my colleague John Bergman put out a few months ago, and you can find a link to that right there on the front page. So I'll be expounding on that, basically using that as a framework for the presentation. And from there on out, I'll be kind of sharing my own experience as a classroom teacher. It looks like there's a lot of higher ed people in the audience today, so I'm going to try to gear a little bit of what we're be talking about towards higher ed as well. But a lot of these things are universally applicable. I've worked with teachers kindergarten through graduate schools in all different subject areas. Now, everything looks different in different areas and different grade levels, so keep that in mind. This is really not a one-size-fits-all approach. This is not a, here's your three-ring binder, you're now okay to go flip your classroom. These are tools that teachers keep in their toolbox, so keep that in mind as we move through the presentation today. You can find me on Twitter. I'm Chemical Sams. I don't tweet a whole heck of a lot, but it's a good way to get in touch with me. And then if you want more information about professional development, you can find John Bergman and my colleague and I at flipclass.com, and we have a team of people who can send out information. Now, to start out, what I do want to do is I want to get a little bit of information about you. So you've heard from me. I want to hear from you. So to get going, I'm going to bring up a poll here. So go ahead and take a look at this poll and go ahead and vote. Now, if you're a higher ed teacher, just go ahead and put teacher. If you're a teacher/professor, I guess we'll put that in there. But this is nice to know who I'm talking to. Oh, it looks like lots and lots of actual instructors today. I'm assuming teachers and or professors. Okay, so I'm talking to practitioners. You're my people. I was a teacher. I was a high school chemistry teacher for 12 years. I'm currently out of the classroom doing a little bit more administrative work, but I'm actually getting back into the classroom now. I'm teaching some ed classes at a small college here in the Pittsburgh area out in Latrobe called St. Vincent College, and doing some work here at the seminary where I work as well. So good, lots of teachers that I'm talking to. So I'd like to just to have an idea of who my audience is. So teachers, hopefully I'm going to leave you with some tools in your toolbox, like I mentioned, things that you can take away and maybe even start doing tomorrow just to get you started if this is something that is enticing to you. So let's talk a little bit first about flipped classrooms. There's a lot of confusion, I think, out there around this discussion of flipped learning and a flipped classroom. So let's talk a little bit about what this actually is. And so a flipped classroom, if you read anything about it, there's a common thread. And that common thread is that you're taking something that you were doing in the classroom, in a school setting, you're shifting that into the home environment, and then what you were sending home as homework, you're bringing back into the school environment. So it's a really time shift of where direct instruction and practice and application occurs. Now, again, I like to actually call this Flipped Class 101. This is kind of the entry point into the world of flipped learning. This is where you can start, but I really encourage you not to stop at this point. So definitely take this information and use this as a launch point to get into deeper things. And hopefully I'll give you some best practices here to do that. Now, one of the powerful tools that we can use to actually take our direct instruction, to take our content out of the classroom and deliver that outside of the classroom space is the power of video. So why in the world would we want to use video as an instructional tool? Well, a couple of reasons. One is this. If you pile 600 people into a large lecture hall and you give them new information, somewhere along the line in the history of education, we thought that was an efficient way to actually deliver content and to deliver information. But really, we think we've taught 600 people. There's 600 people in the room, but we've really only taught the people who've actually learned. The other people, it's just kind of fallen on deaf ears. It's really roll off, and they haven't actually learned or internalized anything. So the power of video is that you can actually deliver instruction to an individual when they are ready to hear that instruction. So the idea being not just that we're delivering something as homework, delivering something on video as homework per se, but we're delivering it to the individual, and the individual's learning in their own learning space and time. So that's the power of video. The other powerful thing about video is that video is a familiar format. You know, if I need to learn to do something, what do? I hop online and I look for a YouTube video to figure out how to do it. So those of you who live in snowy environments, my snowblower broke a while back. And so I logged in and I went to YouTube and I typed in the model number for my snowblower. And in doing so, I found a video series of the complete teardown and rebuild of my snowblower, along with diagnostic videos of how to figure out why things broken and fix it. So I was able to find a video that walked me through step by step how to actually go about learning to do it. So it's a familiar format. My 8-year-old son, when he wants information, his instinct is to hop online. Just this morning, I was talking to my 8-year-old. He had some stickers, one sticker for every state in the United States. And he wanted to put them in order of, he wanted to put them in the order in which the states came into the United States. So started with Delaware and then Pennsylvania. So he got to number 4, and he said, Dad, what's the 4th state, the 4th that came into the United States? And I said, well, I don't know. And I'd have to look that up. But I bet there's a Wikipedia page with that information on it. And then Mom hollers over. She says, yeah, but there's also a book downstairs that has that information as well. And my 8-year-old said, yeah, Mom, but the book's going to take too long. I want to look for it on the internet. So his instinct is to just hop online and look for information. So he's 8. That's the first place he wants to go. And most of us who have smartphones in our pocket just do the same thing. We can ask our phone a question, and our phone will tell us the answer. In addition, many of the answers will also have a video that is linked to it. So this is a powerful medium. So it's powerful, but we also have to be careful with video. And a lot of the 5 things that I'm going to talk about today are things that we need to be careful of when we're using video as an instructional tool, so that we do it well and we don't just bore people to death with our videos, and that we're doing things appropriately for students. Okay, so number 1, the first thing you need to think of when you are flipping your class is to keep your instructional videos short. Okay, keep them short. Now, my general rule of thumb is 1 to 1.5 minutes per grade level. So if you are a 10th grade teacher, we're talking 10 to 15 minutes tops. You don't want to make these long. There's a reason that most YouTube videos are short. If you look at YouTube analytics, most people will watch about the first 5 minutes of video, and then they stop. You get a lot of bang for your buck with a short, concise video. But posting long, multi-hour recorded lectures, people, they fade after a while, and they're not going to be able to do it. So even if you do have an hour-long lecture, split it up into short, bite-sized segments that people consume when they're ready for it. Okay, so 10 minutes, you can grab it, consume it, and be done. Whereas an hour, if you don't have an hour to do, you're going to have to buffer through. You're going to have to find the spot in which you stop. So keep them brief. That's something that I would encourage you to do. Now, part of this slide is just to show you, one, what I look like. I'm the tall, handsome one on the left, and that's my colleague and co-author, John Berkman, on the right. He's the short one. I am the tall one. And but this is also the shameless self-promotion slide, so feel free to go buy book number 1. It will give you all the information you need to know about Flip Class 101 and some more information about kind of a second permutation of Flip Classrooms if you want more information. Now, I do have a second book coming out this summer, more stories about how teachers have taken this and applied it in various grade levels and subject areas. All right, shameless self-promotion aside, keep your videos short, keep them brief. People will be more likely to be able to consume them and use them. All right, now, the next question we need to talk about is if you are going to make your own videos, or if somebody else should make videos and you should use work that other people have used. So we're going to pull up poll question number 2 here. So if you could go ahead and just take a quick second to respond to this question, whose videos should you use? If you're a teacher or a professor, should you make your own content? Should you use videos that are made by other teachers? Should you just use Khan Academy? Should you use professionally made videos? Or should you use the stuff that comes with your textbook curriculum, or some combination of any of those? Go ahead and take a couple seconds to respond. I'm going to get a sip of coffee while you post your response. All right, responses still coming in. Looks like we've got a little over 300 responses. We're right at 400 participants. Looks like most of you have responded to this, so that's good. So it looks like we've got a combination here. Most of you are saying, use a combination of those things above, but it looks like we've got a pretty strong contingent, 10 or 11% here, who say that that teachers should make their own content, or that they would be most comfortable making their own content. So let's talk a little bit about that as we go back here to the presentation. So should I make my own content, or should I use somebody else's? This is what I like to call the create, curate question. Am I going to be responsible for making my own instructional content, or am I going to use somebody else's? All right, so I think it's best practice if a teacher creates their own content. Now, I'm going to start with this, and then I'm going to tell you why we should possibly consider that. Oh, somebody caught a typo in mine. Yes, sorry, science teacher, not an English teacher. My mistake. I put the wrong version of whose. I was going to ask my wife that this morning when I was typing that question, and I completely forgot it. Now I have a typo. All right, so why would somebody want to make their own content? I think one of the main key components of education is the relationship that teachers have with their students. It's irreplaceable. It's something that you simply cannot replicate. It's something that you cannot ignore. And there's a relationship that occurs between the teacher and a student. And when the teacher has their face on the presentation, or their voice is part of the presentation, or their handwriting's on that, there's a connection that the student has with the teacher that they don't have with anybody else. So that's an important concept. Now, is that essential? I'm not convinced it's essential, but I think it's a valuable component. In addition to this relationship aspect, there's a little bit of a social contract that teachers are creating with their students when they make their own material. So as a teacher, I never used all of the textbook curriculum that came with the textbook package. I used the book. I used some resources, some of the worksheets, some of the test questions. I kind of piecemealed it all together. I didn't write everything from scratch. I didn't just use all the textbook stuff. I used the textbook materials when they were appropriate. I made my own when it was appropriate, and I collected it from other teachers when it was appropriate. But the fact that I went through that process of choosing for my students respected that. They said, you know what, he's not just giving me a canned curriculum. He's putting some work into this, and the social arrangement then is I will put work back into it for my teacher. And I think that's something important that we really need to think of before we do too much mechanizing of our curriculum. Now, a lot of teachers don't want to make a lot of content. Now, I was crazy. I made 100 chemistry videos and 50 AP chemistry videos my first year I did this, and I was doing this with my colleague, John. So be careful. You can kind of go overboard, and you can really burn yourself out. I've seen teachers burn out because they made too much content. So if you're looking for a good entry point into this, perhaps you would want to consider using somebody else's material, and then if you find that it's not working for you, or if you find that it's not quite meeting your needs, then you can replace that and then move into something that you've created. Vocabulary. Vocabulary is an important consideration here because there are terms that we use when we describe things as teachers that are not necessarily universal. So, if a teacher says, I'm going to use the term molar mass, and they go find a video that uses the term gram formula mass. Those two things are two ways to describe something similar in chemistry, but they could confuse a student if you're saying one thing and somebody else is saying another. So you really have to just be careful. But the key here, though, is knowing that we're not just interested in putting out a bunch of content arbitrarily. We're going to be very, very strategic in teaching a specific topic, and we're going to use what's most appropriate. It might be most appropriate to use something that you've made. It might be most appropriate to use something that one of your colleagues has made. You might want to go search the internet for something that's going to work for you. I don't know the answer to that question. You're going to have to work this out. Now, that being said, let me give you a specific example on both sides of this coin. So first side, my colleague John Borgman, he's actually not joining me on this webinar today because he is in Mexico working with a school in Monterrey. Now, he went down to the school a few months ago and gave a presentation on the flipped classroom. And so he went down there, and they have instructional designers who were going to create the content and were going to share it with all the professors at this community college. And so 2 or 3 professors were going to make the content and share it with everybody else. And that's exactly what they did. And for those 3 professors who made the content, this was so effective. They had great results with those videos. But everybody else did not exactly have the same success. They found that it was better for the teachers to make their own content. The students who were in classes with professors other than the professors they were seeing did not have the best experience, and that they wanted their own teachers to make their own content. So now they're going through the process of teaching everybody to make their own content and move them towards that direction. Now, the other side of that coin, I worked for the school up in Denver, and they had an algebra department of 6 teachers. 2 of them were very gifted presenters of content. 2 of them were very good at developing in-class activities. 2 of them are very good at developing and analyzing assessment data. So they split up the workload. 2 of them made videos, 2 of them made in-class stuff, and 2 of them worked on the assessment, and they all shared across all of their classes, and it worked brilliantly. But they had a culture in their school of sharing. They had a culture in the school of students being free to ask questions of all teachers, not feeling locked into one. So it really worked in that particular instance. So just think about it and keep track of that. So let's move on then to number 2. Create and curate is number 1. Got to keep short videos. So even if you're going to make your own, if you're going to find somebody else, find something that's most appropriate. Okay, number 2. Don't assume that all students have the internet. Now, here's poll question number 3. I want to find out of your students, what percentage of your students do not have internet? Okay, what percentage of your students do not have the internet at home? Go ahead and respond to this question, and I'm kind of curious about this.
What do you think it is at FTSU? Some students don't. Okay, probably less than 5%. Sure. And they have access here.
All right, looks like we've got quite a few responses. Most of you, it seems that 0 to 10% of your students do not have the internet at home. And a few of you are saying 10 to 20. Very few of you are saying more than 40% do not have the internet. Well, I'm going to confess, this is a little bit of a trick question, because it does not matter if the answer to that question is less than 1% or if the answer to that question is 95%. The key is, if some of your students do not have access to the internet at home, you need to be able to provide them the resources that they need in order to access your content, especially if you're delivering this stuff online. Now, if you're in a higher ed situation or if you're in a private school situation, this is probably not as universally applicable in terms of the law. If you're a public school teacher, you have something called free and appropriate public education, so that we have to provide these resources for our students. So it doesn't matter if that's a big number or a little number, you need to provide them some sort of access. So let's talk a little bit about solutions for these questions, solutions for these problems. So when I was a teacher, 25% of my students did not have access to the internet at home. So what we had to do is I put these my video content on a flash drive and gave it to students who had a computer at home. If they did not have a computer at home, I burned these onto a DVD. And they were able to pop it in their DVD player, and it worked. Now, that was fine and dandy, and that was in 2007. Okay, 2007. A lot has changed in the world in 2007. I was talking to a school, and in this particular school, 85% of their students qualified for free and reduced lunch. And about 85% of their students also had a smartphone in their pocket. So this is a very different world that we're in right now for access. So here's a little trick for your students. If you have middle schoolers or high schoolers or college students, first day of class, you say, how many of you have Facebook? They will all raise their hand, and you say, okay, you all obviously have access to the internet. Moving on. And you move on. So, no, again, that's a little bit glib, and it's not always necessarily reality, but be careful. Make sure students have access, but you will be surprised at what kind of access students actually have. They might not have it in their home, but they will have access in the public library, they'll have access in the school library, and so on. So, or smartphones, MP4 players, things like that. There are plenty of ways to distribute content to students. And with the lines now being blurred between desktop and laptop solutions, or I'm sorry, desktop and mobile solutions, it's becoming less and less of an issue. But it is still an issue. So you have to provide access. So don't let this be a deal breaker for you. Find a way to provide access and move on. Now, let me talk to you a little bit about a colleague of mine, actually a family friend of mine in Colorado. Now, I was teaching up in the mountains of Colorado, and I was in a rural area where 25% of my students did not have access to the internet. Now, my family friend, he was in rural Colorado, where 25% of his students did not have electricity or running water in their home. And we were chatting, incidentally, at my grandfather's funeral, and we were talking about education, just in general, and he said, yeah, Aaron, I read your book, I'm kind of interested in what's going on, but here's my problem. My kids don't have electricity or plumbing at home, and so I can't send any homework with my kids because when the sun goes down, they can't do any more work. I said, well, what are you already doing to help meet those needs? He said, well, we open up the school at about 6:30 in the morning, and we let students come in, they can use the showers, we feed them breakfast, and we open up the library, we have some money from the state to help staff the library. And he said we do the same thing after school. We actually keep it open until about 6 p.m. The library is open, students can hang out, they can do their work, there's heat and electricity and so on before they go home. I said, well, you've already solved the problem. You're providing access for your students to have access to the resources they need to learn. He said, oh, well, I thought I had to make it a video that they had to watch at home or I couldn't call it flipped classroom. I started banging my head on the table. I said, no. Let's get over the semantics of all this. I want you to meet the needs of your students, provide them access to the resources they need, and that's exactly what he did. So I'm seeing lots of comments over here in the chat about, people astounded that there are places in the United States where 25% of the students don't have running water or electricity, and it's true. There are a lot of rural communities where that happened. Actually, right around the time the housing market crashed around 2008, a lot of people went out and bought up a bunch of land in some rural areas, spent all their money on acquiring land and building a home, and then they called up the electricity company and said, I'd like electricity, and the electricity company said, that'll be $20,000, and they said, oh, I didn't realize it was going to be that expensive, and they just live without electricity. We're running water. Same thing to drill a well, costs a lot of money, just an unexpected cost, and so they just do without. So this is a reality that we live in. But there were resources available that the school had to deliver that to the students, and they didn't have to do it at home necessarily. So there's poverty in the city, there's poverty in the country, there's poverty all over the place where they might not have access to the resources on their own, but we can help provide them with a little creativity. Another thing that I did in my own class was I collected old computers from my colleagues. I said, if you get a new computer, I want your old one. And they would give me their old computers, I would refurbish them, and I would give them away to students who didn't have a computer at home. Now, they didn't have the internet, obviously, but they had a computer that they didn't have before. So there's all sorts of ways to overcome this, so don't let this be a deal breaker for you. But again, don't assume that your students have it, but definitely solve the problem. Okay, number three, if you are going to flip your class, you're going to use video as an instructional tool. if the students don't actually view the content and they come to class, don't give them the lecture instead. You have to stand your ground. Be like the soldiers that are out in front of Buckingham Palace that just stand there and stare at the tourists and are not fazed by what's going on around them. Okay? So here's the deal. I know a few teachers that they tried using video as an instructional tool. The students came to class with lots of excuses. I couldn't do this. I couldn't have access. My iPod broke. My dad was using the computer all night. Those are things that will happen. But what you cannot do is then say, well, okay, since 5 of you didn't watch the content, I'm going to re-deliver the instruction live to the class. If you do that once, then the students know that they don't have to do it because you're just going to do it for them as soon as they get to class. So you cannot budge. You cannot move. You must stand your ground. Now, you do still have to make sure that your students are up to speed on the content. So what I did, if I had students that came to class, by the way, I always have had students who didn't do their homework. When I was a traditional teacher or when I was using the flipped classroom, they were kids who showed up and did not do their homework. This was always the case. And there will always be students who don't do their homework, and that's fine. But what I did is I had 2 computers in the back of the class, and I said, okay, if you come to class and you didn't do your work, then you get to go to the back of the classroom, put on some headphones, you can watch the content, that's fine, while I'm helping other kids, and while we're doing other things in the class, and you're going to go ahead and do the work yourself. Now, I'm seeing some interesting comments in the chat right now about really disenfranchising students and hurting students who don't have access to resources at home. So let's talk a little bit about that, because I noticed this disparity in my class, and I try to figure out a solution to solve for it. So what I did is I moved to an asynchronous classroom, where students were no longer required to view content at home outside of class. I delivered the instruction to the students when they were ready for it, just-in-time instruction. After a year, I had a library of video content for my students, and I asked myself, why does every student have to be at the same point, at the same time, on the same day, in the same class? Why not let students have some flexibility to move through the content, to move through the things at their own pace? Now, not a completely self-paced pace, because some students, if you don't give them a pace, they will take no pace at all. Okay? But a flexible pace where we can have weekly benchmarks and I can provide students with the support they need. And then if they don't have access to stuff outside of the classroom, there is plenty of time and flexibility within the class that they can actually have access to these resources. So many of my students realized that they did not need to take anything home when we moved to this flexible environment. So what I did then is students basically had a menu. I had learning objectives. I had a menu of resources for them to learn, and they could pick and choose any, all, or none of those. And then they would then be responsible to demonstrate their understanding of their learning. So what this really got us away from is this idea of playing school. I didn't have students jumping through hoops. I didn't have students, just going after points. I had students actually learning. I had students actually going about meeting learning objectives and demonstrating their understanding of those objectives. It was completely different. It absolutely blew my mind. So part of this difference, though, is that I had to restructure my classroom. I couldn't think, I have them for 55 minutes. They've got to be all doing the same thing. Everyone needs to be in a nice, neat row, and everybody got to be quiet and efficiently working. I had a very chaotic, a very loud classroom, but it was one in which lots and lots of learning was going on. But if you go down this road, a lot of parents may start raising some eyebrows. They're going to say, wait a minute, what's going on here? This is not how I went to school. What is happening? So I had to educate both my students and my parents how to actually go about learning in an environment like this. So videos for parents, explaining them how business happens, sending a letter home, encouraging parents to view content with their children if they can. Most of my students ended up with less work to do outside of their classroom, and they had less homework time, less time spent out of the class. And then I booked my open house, where I had a video introducing myself and running in the back of the classroom, and I just walked around and answered questions that the parents had. So this could be different for a lot of parents. Now, the interesting thing that I'm finding about, or that I'm discovering, is that we're finally giving students who don't have a lot of help and support at home in the educational process. Maybe parents are working multiple jobs, maybe parents don't have an educational background that would allow them to assist their children with learning. But what we're finding is that we are now sending students home with the easy stuff. Viewing content is simple. That's the introduction to content. And any parent can help their student press play. Even if they don't understand chemistry, they can give their kids the support to make sure they're actually going about doing the work. So we used to send students home with the hard stuff, and now we're sending students home with the easy stuff. And so we're giving them a way to do meaningful homework outside of the class with minimal support. So it's something that's very exciting. All right, number 4. Let's move on. You got to hold each student individually accountable for the work. So how do we do that? How do we go about holding students accountable? A lot of people ask me, well, how do I know if the students actually view the content or not? Well, I went low tech. I said, all right, students, view content and just show me your notes. I want to see that you wrote down something, anything. Give me any indication that you actually interacted with the content. I am not a web developer. I do not play one on television. This is not a gift of mine. So doing something like this, where I had a video embedded on a web page with a Google form embedded beneath it, was not something I was able to do when I started doing this. I've since figured out how to do this, and it works. But this is a way that you can do this electronically. So I went low tech. I said, show me your notes. I have some colleagues that just embed a video like this. They have a little place to respond, type in your name, give me a kind of an open-ended reaction, and then answering a multiple choice question. So this is a way that you can collect the data. It dumps into a Google spreadsheet, and then you can just pull it up in the morning and figure out who actually viewed it, what their responses were, and identify some misconceptions that you may need to address in class. So there's lots of different ways to ensure whether or not students have interacted with the content. But one of the better ways that I found to hold students accountable was to employ different forms of grading systems. So I made this transition to a standards-based grading system, or an objectives-based grading system, or competency-based grading system. It's kind of different ways to describe this format. But what this moved us away from is just this whole, going after points mindset and mentality that a lot of my students had. So learning became the goal, not the acquisition of points and letter grades. So what this encouraged students to do was to not just jot some things down so I could check off the box that they had viewed the content, but to actually interact with it, because they knew that not only was I going to check to see if they had done something to interact, but I was going to ask them questions. They were going to have to interact with me and demonstrate their understanding. Lots and lots and lots of formative assessment going on. So whether or not I did this electronically or whether or not I checked their notes, I was constantly in conversation with my students, asking them questions to find out what they understood and what they didn't understand to keep them moving along. And I was constantly evaluating where they were, and I knew my students better, and I knew what they understood better in this format within weeks rather than months, as it had been prior to this. So, all right. So we have to hold the students accountable. Part of this is just changing our mindsets about what we're required to do, and possibly this could be a restructuring of the way we're actually grading and evaluating. So again, you can flip your classroom without doing any of this changing of grading, but accountability is key, and figuring out how students can do that is important. All right, step number 5, teach students how to watch your videos. So, if somebody pops in a video, like Batman or the Avengers or Toy Story, whatever it happens to be, you kind of plunk it in, you grab your popcorn, you kind of veg out for a while. It's exciting, you watch the movie, but you're not really engaged. Typically, you're not expected to take notes and learn from Toy Story 3. You're just going to enjoy a fun story between, Woody and Buzz and all their other friends. So this is not viewing content the same way we view videos. All right, so, and this is the case with everything we do in school. We have to teach our students the appropriate ways to conduct business within our classrooms, the appropriate ways to conduct business in an educational setting. So I actually spend the first couple of days with my students teaching them how to view content appropriately, encouraging them to turn some things off. Maybe you don't want 4 or 5 tabs up, Facebook and Twitter and all sorts of other fun stuff. Put your phone down, get out a notebook perhaps. Make good use of the pause button. So one of the exercises that I do is on the first day of class, I pull up the first chemistry video, we all watch it together, and I give control of the pause button to one student. And I tell that student, okay, pause this when you need to, fast forward and rewind as you see necessary. And inevitably, 1 or 2 minutes into it, that student is hitting the pause button at a different time than the rest of the class needs the button pause. And so by the end of the video, that is the most hated student in the class, and the rest of the class is ready to strangle this kid because they're not pausing and rewinding when the other students need it. So you have to train them. So I use that then as a segue and encouraging them, hey, well, guess what you get to do? You get to pause me and remind me and do anything that you want as you do this content. Now, one of the other things that I provided for my students was support in note-taking. So I gave students options. I had fill-in-the-blank style notes for students who may have some disabilities that would prevent them from writing everything down. And some students, even without disabilities, just found that was a helpful bit of instruction and support to get them to the point where they could efficiently and effectively learn from these videos. Others, I use kind of a blank Cornell-style note-taking that students can fill in or type in on their computer. And other students, they just turn it on and just absorb it. I am not a note-taker by nature. So I take very minimal notes. I jot things down, but I like to do a lot of reflection in the end. So journaling after I viewed content or journaling after I learned something is a better way for me to learn. So I just give my students lots of options and really spent the time one-on-one with them, helping them learn how they learn and providing them that kind of stuff. All right, so you have to teach students how to view it, but one of the tricky parts here is figuring out how you're going to distribute this to all of your students. Now, we've talked about meeting the needs of those who don't have access. And again, the number of students without access is going to continue to come down. And as we move to a place where internet access becomes more and more pervasive, choosing a good spot for that is going to become very essential. Now, there are tons and tons of places to put video content. YouTube and Vimeo, or TeacherTube if you want a public. Use something like Google Drive or Dropbox if you want it private. There are plenty of places you can put it out there, plenty of places that students can have access, and every single one of these options here gives you the opportunity to either post a link somewhere else or email a link to someone or just getting it to someone either in a public or a private way. Some teachers don't want their face out on for the whole world to see, and they want to do this private. And that's totally fine, totally understandable. And all of these have privacy settings that will allow you to do that. But I think the more important key is that you actually find some sort of learning management system in order to distribute this in a very structured and organized way to your students. Now, there are more and more solutions out there for content delivery, learning management delivery. New learning management systems continue to pop. So obviously this is by no means an exhaustive list. These are just some very popular ones. But using a learning management system and using something like Edmodo, which is very popular in K-12 institutions, very Facebook-like and familiar to students, it's a one-spot stop where students know that they can go, they can find all the resources they need to get there. So I supervise student teachers for a local college, and one of my student teachers decided that he wanted to try some flipped learning. I didn't even tell him to, he just decided to do it. It was great. But what he did is he has an Edmodo site set up for the class. He creates a short video, posts the link in Edmodo. The students just know that they need to log on to Edmodo, and they go there and view it. Now, he had some students who had some access problems at home, and so they have a 15-minute study hall in the mornings, and the students who couldn't get access at home, their instructions are to go into the study hall time, spend those 15 minutes doing the content, and every single kid had viewed the content by the time I showed up in class to observe them that day. It was very cool. So learning management systems are a great place to just organize the distribution for your students and giving them a kind of a focused area to know that when I log into the learning management system, it's learning time. And I'm going to turn off my distractions. I'm going to interact with this differently than I do when I'm watching the Avengers. Okay, so I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts, and we'll move into a question and answer time here, hopefully with about 15 minutes. The key here is I've been talking a lot about video and using video as an instructional tool, but really flipped classrooms and a flipped learning experience is not about the video. It's leveraging the power of video to get you to the point where you're doing better things in class, deeper things in your class. So the big question then is, what am I going to do? If you've been a lecturer for many, many years and all of a sudden you record all of your content and you put it online, why would anybody want to go to your class? And you have to ask yourself that question. You have to get to the point where you are providing added value for someone to actually show up to the time in your class. Now, as a science teacher, I did more inquiry-based learning. I did more project-based learning. I did more labs. For college professors, if you were in a 600 student lecture hall, you're really going to have to rethink how you're going to use that class time for something other than content delivery. And a very good example of that is Dr. Eric Mazur, who's a physics professor at Harvard. He's doing a lot of work in what's called peer instruction. And using this peer instruction model, he has students, teaching each other, helping each other out, and he's developed some software that really assists in that process. So I would encourage you to look into his work and check that out. So, but you really have to make sure that you're recuperating the time and doing something better in class, getting students into higher order thinking, to the top of Bloom's taxonomy, if you will, and you know what that is. So get that low end content delivery outside of the group space, deliver that to the individuals, leveraging video, and then you're going to rethink your class. So teachers are thinking of all sorts of different things. We've got creation going on. We've got more public speaking. We've got projects going on, experiments, discussions, read problem solving. The sky is the limit, but get kids doing, get students making, get students researching and developing and not just being passive recipients of content. Well, I want to leave you with just a couple little bits of information. As was mentioned when I was introduced, that I do serve on the board of a nonprofit organization called the Flip Learning Network. We do host a conference every summer. We were in Minnesota last year. We're going to be in Pittsburgh area this year. We have K through 20. So a lot is in K-12, but we added a higher ed strand last year, and we have a really powerful higher education strand this year. So if you're a college professor, there will be definitely something for you. If you're a K-12 educator, there will be something for you there as well. But go to fliplearning.org. You can find registration information about the conference, but you can also find links to past webinars. In fact, my colleague John, he did a webinar with Adobe, I believe back in September. You can find a link to that as well as some other ones that we've done. We have a community of practice, a Ning network of over 17,000 educators there. We have open houses. We have a flip today. There is some, some research coming out. It's emerging right now. We've done some. Others have done some others. So we do have a page for research, resources, case studies, books, videos, podcasts, all sorts of great stuff. So I'm going to encourage you to go to fliplearning.org. Check that out. Lots of information there. And hopefully, look at that, 12:46. Missed it by a minute. Not too bad. All right. Well, take some questions right now. I think, Alan, are you going to be moderating the questions? I've been trying to keep an eye on the chat. It's going pretty fast. So
absolutely, yeah. It's an amazing chat conversation with over 400 folks in the room today. But we've been trying to follow it, and I'll try and sum up some of the questions that we've seen as we've gone through. There have been lots of questions oriented around the question of implementation. You know, that sort of moment of, you know, how do I wrestle with administrators and principals and students and people voicing that they don't like this or that they're not satisfied with this? I guess a kind of summary of that thread would be, how do you deal with the implementation phase with all the pushback you get? Is there a general strategy?
I think a general strategy, one, is to have thick skin, because there's always complaints. Anytime you change, there's always going to be dissenters and naysayers. Just bottom line, that's going to happen. Now, fortunately, is now that some research is emerging, that you'll have that to support you, whereas when I was started doing this many years ago, there was none, because we were just kind of carving out a new niche in the world of education. So that will be helpful. But to be honest, I almost gave up my second year. So my first year, I did this Flip Class 101, where I pre-recorded all my lessons, and students all watched them at home, and then came to class and did work. And that was great, and I said, okay, now that I have this library, I'm going to move to an asynchronous, mastery-based, competency-based classroom. And I almost gave up. It was hard work, and it was so different than anything else that was going on at the school, different than anything else my students encountered and parents encountered, that I got a lot of pushback. But I kept going, and I stuck with it. And after the second year of that mastery-based approach, it started to kind of set in, and it started to become culture in our school. So I went to the principal. I said, look, I'm frustrated. I'm about ready to give up. What's going on? And he said, Aaron, it takes about 3 years to make meaningful change. And it takes about 3 years to make a cultural shift, especially in the school that we were in. He said, stick with it. After 3 years, you will notice that nobody asks any questions anymore. So, and that's exactly what happened. After the third year, this is how business was done in the Woodland Park High School Science Department. It was just part of the school culture. So it does take time. There will be pushback, but find colleagues who have done this and gone before you, get the letters that they send home to parents, host a parent meeting. I've actually sat in on some parent meetings here in the Pittsburgh area where parents have lots of questions. Teachers provided answers, and I was able to go provide some answers as well. It's just a good place. Information is key and open communication.
Excellent, excellent. I already mentioned that just a question of whether you could summarize the five main mistakes to avoid, just to kind of refresh for everybody as we've gone through to the end. But what were the big five?
Yeah, sure. Let me do one thing for you here. Let me pull up the the first page of the presentation. John's blog post has all five listed there, and he has a short description of each of those, so I'll put that link there. But yeah, let me go through the five here real quick. Number one is keep your videos short. Number two, don't assume all students have the internet at home. Number three, don't lecture if students don't watch your videos, so don't give in if they show up and make excuses. Number four, hold each student individually accountable for their work. And number five, teach students how to watch the videos.
Now, Aaron, the last time that I spoke with John, we had a wonderful conversation. We were getting a little eggheady. So we were talking about a constructivist approach versus a kind of traditional lecture-based, lecture-centered didactic approach. And I made the suggestion that maybe what kind of is happening here with this learning experience is that for a long time, people have said, well, let's implement a little Vygotsky, let's go a social constructivist approach. But it's gotten lots of pushback because it was very difficult to find accountability. I wonder if you've had any thoughts about that, if this is maybe a place where it's convergent enough that there's still enough accountability in the chain that people feel more comfortable with this more kind of on-demand constructivist approach. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I would see this both as being convergent between those two approaches and also transitional. If you've been a traditional stand-up in front and deliver content teacher for many years, better part of your career, like I was for many years, this is a way to transition to a more student-centered classroom or a more constructivist approach without having to sacrifice on content. And also in this age of accountability where a lot of teachers' salaries are linked to student performance on tests, a lot of teachers are reluctant to move away from content delivery. So what this allows teachers to do is to maintain quality control of content delivery, to build a library of content delivery that they can always fall back on, that they can always direct students to, that they can always direct parents and administrators to if they ever ask questions about content, and then give them the time and the energy and the freedom to move toward more projects, toward more inquiry-based learning, and hopefully the transition that we'll see is that that as teachers become, as teachers make that transition, they'll find that students are learning through inquiry just as well as they were through content delivery. The students are learning through project-based learning environments that are structured around standards, that are structured around core curriculum. That they're learning just as well through that environment. That content delivery takes a back seat. That's really what I would like to see.
Right. We have another question in the thread, a good one. It's about accessibility and what kinds of concerns are raised there. I know certainly the Adobe software automatically does closed captions and things, but what kinds of accessibility issues have you seen arise as you look at these classrooms?
Yeah, you mentioned one in terms of captioning. So yeah, I mean, as technologies like these Adobe products come out that have auto captioning, that's going to be huge because my videos are not captioned, and that's a problem. It really is, especially teaching in a public institution. So that's something I would like to see more and more teachers doing and focusing on. The other side of that, if you're hearing impaired, you need captions, but if you're visually impaired, what if I'm using a lot of graphics? So just providing students resources to go through the visuals that are happening as well. But in school institutions, generally speaking, students with certain disabilities have someone that assists them through those processes. So just teaming up with the resources, the teacher resources, and the aides, and the paraeducators, and the assistants that we have, and teaching them as well how to operate in here is huge. And then the other, just in terms of matter of equity, is that I mentioned was just access to the content. So just finding solutions and finding ways to do that is really, really important. But there are resources out there. And there are a lot of students with disabilities that need assistance. But the feedback that I did get from the special ed teachers and from students with disabilities is that they appreciated being able to view content and take in direct instruction on their own time, at their own pace, without an audience around them. There are students, who struggle to take notes and who simply can't view something on the screen and write it down on their paper in a timely manner. Those are the kids asking you to, oh wait, go back to the previous slide. I didn't quite get that. So those students have thanked me personally time after time that they can hit the pause button in the privacy of another room or their own home and be able to take notes as slowly as they need to and go back to review other content and do that with their special ed teacher, with them, providing them with support.
It becomes a safe place to learn. Excellent. Dr. Gigi asked a great question, which is, how about the research base? Is the research base forming? I know that fliplearning.org has been doing research, and I know there have been a number of other studies. Can you give us a summary of how to get a good grip on the research base to establish evidence that this has an impact and what that impact is?
Yeah, so most of the research right now is very preliminary and anecdotal. I have, very non-scientific, my own classroom data in terms of, my grades, in terms of my AP test scores, stuff like that. Other teachers are collecting that kind of, little action research. Again, go to fliplearning.org. We do have a page for research. It's still fairly sparse, but I do know of multiple doctoral and master's theses that are being written on this right now. And if you happen to be pursuing a PhD or want to, and you are looking for research topics around the flipped classroom, contact the executive director of the Flip Learning Network. Her name is Kari Arkstrom. She has quite a list of things that we would love to see researched and have researched. And one of these days when I get around going back to grad school and doing a PhD, I hope to do some of that work myself. But it's coming, it's emerging, it's being researched and studied right now. I'm working, the Flip Learning Network is working on a project with the Open University in the UK, researching the use of open education research resources in a flip learning environment. So this stuff is coming. It's just taking time and money that most of us don't have a lot of to make happen. But it's getting there. I wish I had a better answer, but keep an eye on fliplearning.org.
Excellent. Excellent. I know that there have been a few other questions in the chat, and some are floating to the top. There was one I saw that was particularly interesting, which is, can you describe how you're using video, and have you seen any differences between those uses? So, for example, are you using PowerPoints with voiceovers? Are you using talking head video? Are you using some kind of animations? Or what are you using? And do you think there's any notable difference, or is there any research that shows there's a difference between one approach or another, or a combination of these approaches? What are your thoughts on that?
So that's actually an area of very much that I'm interested in researching and studying is what types of videos are most effective and where in the process of learning is video most effective. Should it come at the beginning of a learning cycle? Should it become in the middle of an inquiry-based cycle? Should it be used mostly to generate interest? You go to TED Ed, ed.ted.com. So like TED Talks, they've got an education division. They've animated lessons that teachers have written, and they're great for capturing the interest of a learner and getting them to want to learn more. They're not designed to be comprehensive instructional, content delivery tools. They're designed to generate interest. So that's one way to use video. Another way is obviously directed instruction. Here's the content you need to learn. We're going to do something with it when you get to class. I have a colleague out in the San Francisco area who's a chemistry teacher. He puts video in the middle of an inquiry cycle where he has kids engaged in investigation and inquiry first. When they get to their absolute end of their limits, then he intervenes with a video to kind of smooth out the surface and fill in the gaps. They call it educational spackle. So it can come in different places. Now, in terms of how I've used video, So I had one of my lessons animated by TED Ed. I'm not an animator. I cannot do that. Most of my videos have been screen recordings, so basically recording a PowerPoint presentation. I generally include my webcam. My students like seeing my face, not because I'm good looking, but again, it goes back to that relationship, to that connection that I have with students. And then when I travel, I take my video camera. If I see something that would be of interest to my students, I shoot a little, 1 or 2 minute clip of me talking about whatever sciencey thing I happen to be at, standing in front of the Hope Diamond in the Smithsonian, and that's a, Cornell network solid. Bring that back to my students, and I intersperse those in the final product. But mostly what I've done is screen recording, presentation style with my webcam, and then I have a digital, using digital ink to annotate that and mark it up.
Excellent. Well, I see we're rapidly running down to the end of today's session. I want to thank you, Aaron, for a phenomenal presentation. It was absolutely enlightening, wonderful to see and hear all of the work that's being done and that you've done. I want to remind folks that you can reach out to Aaron through the links we provided throughout the session. Aaron, did you go ahead?
Oh, I just said thanks for having me. It was great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful to have you, and thanks so much to all of you for joining us for today's session. Today's session will be archived and posted later